Hey, I am right at the US-Canadian border. In fact, right there behind me is the gateway to Canada, and I'm just making my way south to a really cool little place that I want to tell you more about. This is my co-pilot, Tucker, and he also is a really awesome GoPro operator. You ought to see him work a camera. Oh, sorry, am I boring you? A little tired over there? All right, are you ready to go to town? Are you ready to go see some awesome stuff? Are you ready? He's ready. Let's go. There is a little town in the Pacific Northwest that is home to not one, but two really unique pieces of American history. And the fact that these two things are so similar and they're both located in this little town is actually pretty amazing. What's even more fascinating is the fact that their origin stories are completely unrelated. How these two things came to be here have nothing to do with each other, and yet they ended up in the same little town. It's fascinating to me, and you can tell I'm excited to tell you about it. Make sure you stick around because you're going to learn about one of the most iconic presidents of all time and how he is directly related to one of these artifacts. So it's going to be a fun adventure today learning about these things. Ultimately, I hope all of these things help you understand the Bible and get a better idea who Jesus is, and really help you learn and grow and just increase your ability to follow him. Hey, welcome to the Journey Church. We are an online church for people everywhere, and we bring the Bible to life as we travel throughout North America, connecting the lessons from the scriptures with the amazing places and people that we encounter along the way. Today, we are in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. It's a little town in the Pacific Northwest located just about 40 miles south of the Canadian border. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at a story in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus returns to his hometown in Nazareth and shares a famous line about prophets not being welcome in their hometown. Before we get into that story, though, in Luke, let's go track down some of these one-of-a-kind pieces of American history. Come on. Well, welcome to the White Caribou Bar, a replica of it anyways. The original bar was built back in the early 1900s and eventually spent time not more than a few blocks away from where I am right now. The original bar held this iconic white caribou, actually the one right here behind me. This is not a replica, this is the one, and you will not believe the journey that he's been on since the early 1900s. Well, the majestic woodland caribou that you see in the Caribou Bar was acquired by Fred Fisher sometime in the early 1900s, and it became the star attraction in his saloon up at Port Hill near the border. Brought to him by two members of the Kootenai tribe, Fred bought the caribou because of its unusual white color, and whether the animal was a true albino or not has really never been determined. And when Fred had the caribou mounted by a taxidermist, the legs were formed using sticks and the body cavity was stuffed with hemp rope. Then the mount joined the unique animal collection in Fred's saloon. The White Caribou greeted customers from the front window of the White Caribou Bar in Bonners Ferry from 1905 to 1909, and then went back up to Port Hill to the Fisher residence after the bar closed. More than 100 years later, the White Caribou once again graces the front window of Fred Fisher's White Caribou Bar. Well, as you come out of the White Caribou Bar and go around the corner over here, you see another famous caribou here at the Boundary County Museum. And this one has also been on quite an adventure. Well, for this guy, it all started back in September of 1888. Imagine that, 135 years ago. A young Teddy Roosevelt came through Bonners Ferry while exploring the West and eventually traveled north up to the Kootenai Lake area where he harvested this very animal right here. Well, young Teddy apparently didn't think this was the trophy of a lifetime, and so he ended up giving this bull caribou to a person that he had been hunting with. And then the story goes on that eventually that caribou was mounted, and to the mount that you see here behind me, eventually given to the Canadian Legion some many years later. And then the Canadian Legion presented the American Legion with this caribou, and it finally, over time, clear up into the mid 50s, made its way to Bonners Ferry, where it lived in the American Legion Hall until the 80s, when it came up missing. Apparently somebody had their eye on it and thought that it would look great in their place. When the reward was posted for $100 to have the caribou returned, sometime not long later, it mysteriously reappeared at the American Legion. And so eventually, this caribou that we have right here in this beautiful little town is resting in the Boundary County Museum alongside another really famous caribou. Imagine these two amazing animals and the same types of things, but yet very different stories, ending up in the same place. I mean, could you ever imagine getting to check out an animal that Teddy Roosevelt shot long before he ever even knew he was going to be president? It's a pretty cool thing. I wonder if we hit the town, if any of the locals know what an amazing thing they have here in this town. Let's go find out if anybody knows about the famous caribou here in Bonners Ferry. All right, so do you know anything about the famous caribou in Bonners Ferry?
No,
No? How long have you lived here?
my entire life.
All right, so do you know anything about the white caribou in Bonners?
When I was in the 3rd grade.
Yeah.
They were on the west side, and they have migrated into Canada. That's all I know.
Okay, so do you know anything about the famous caribou in Bonners Ferry?
Do not.
How long have you lived here?
2 years full-time, part-time, 5 years.
So the question is, do you know anything about the famous caribou in Bonners Ferry?
No.
How long have you lived here?
Goodness. 35 years?
So, do you know about the famous caribou in Bonners Ferry?
Maybe. I know we used to have caribou in town, but no, I guess.
There you go.
Stand by, random questions.
There you go. So, do you know anything about the famous caribou in Bonners Ferry?
A little, not much.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you know?
It's in the
Curious.
museum. Used to be in a bar downtown
Yep. Nice. How long have you lived here?
since 1972.
Thinking of sticking around?
I haven't made up my mind yet.
Well, isn't that interesting? All of these people here in a relatively small town, and you've got these amazing caribou right here in front of them, and yet so many people have never heard of them. You may have heard the saying that familiarity breeds contempt, but I think far more often, familiarity breeds complacency. This idea that you know enough about the people and places around you, while at the same time, you're pretty unaware or uninformed. It's easy to think that we know more than we do. And I think that seeing this play out in real life in this situation will help you better understand what's happening with Jesus when he goes to Nazareth, his hometown that he grew up in. And the people knew him and knew his family. So let's take a look. We're going to look at Luke chapter 4. Let's jump in. Then Jesus returned to Galilee, filled with the Holy Spirit's power, and reports about him spread quickly through the whole region. He taught regularly in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. Quick side note here, Galilee is not his hometown. This is actually the name of the region around the Sea of Galilee. This is a place where there was a number of villages in the area, and Jesus had returned to that general location, and he was bouncing around from village to village, teaching in these various synagogues, which was a name for what we would call a church in our modern day. All right, so back to the passage. It goes like this. When he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stood up to read the scriptures. The scroll of Isaiah, the prophet, was handed to him, and he unrolled the scroll and found a place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that the captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the attendant, and sat down. Well, all eyes in the synagogue looked at him intently, and they began to speak to him. The scripture that you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. Well, everyone spoke well of him and was amazed by the gracious words that came from his lips. But they asked, how can this be? Isn't this Joseph's son? And then he said, "You will undoubtedly quote me this proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself,' meaning do miracles here in your hometown like those you did in Capernaum. But I tell you the truth, no prophet is accepted in his own hometown. Certainly, there were many needy widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the heavens were closed for 3.5 years and a severe famine devastated the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them. He was sent instead to a foreigner, a widow of Zarephath in the land of Sidon. And many in Israel had leprosy in the time of the prophet Elijah. But the only one that he healed was Naaman, who was a Syrian. When they heard this, the people in the synagogue were furious. So they jumped up and they mobbed him and forced him to the edge of a hill on which the town was built. And they intended to push him off over the cliff, but he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. So there's a lot going on here. Jesus rolls into his hometown, and the people knew him there. They were familiar with him, right? They were familiar with his family, his siblings, and they certainly knew that he was a wise teacher. And at first, it seems like they were all on board with him. So he goes into the synagogue and he reads from a passage and then sits down. And up to this point, everything is really normal. Traditionally, rabbis would read from a scroll and then sit down, and everyone would wait for the rabbi to explain the scroll, the scripture that they just read. And this is where Jesus really starts to lose the crowd, so to speak, because his explanation of the passage goes something like this. It's like Jesus is saying, listen, I am the one. I'm the one that the Spirit of the Lord is on. I'm the one that God has anointed to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim that the captives will be released, that the blind will see, the oppressed will be set free, and to announce that the year of the Lord's favor has come. Well, there's a couple of ways that people could respond to this. First of all, they could believe him and be excited and overjoyed with this great news that they've just heard. Or they could start tossing out all the reasons why they didn't believe him. Like, wait a second here. We know this guy. That's Joseph's boy. And I know his brothers. And yeah, his sister lives over here by me. There's no way that this is that guy, right? Which, that's exactly what happened. They doubt that Jesus is who he says he is. And that seems to come as no surprise to Jesus, because right after this, he throws out a couple of examples of other times when God sent someone out on a special assignment to speak for him, and they ran into the same sort of thing where people knew them. So God sent them to go help other people in different areas where they would simply believe they were who they said they were. All of this, he said, who said, Jesus said, it can get a little confusing. So let me break it down. Let's flip back to the white caribou here in this town, right? Did you notice how many people there were that didn't know anything about them? Even if they've lived here for a really long time. You see, what can happen as you become more and more familiar with the people around you or the place that you live is that it's easy to become complacent, right? You get a feeling that you know enough about things, that you've figured it all out, right? You've formed your opinions, you've learned enough about the people in the place, and you may not even realize how strong that you hold to your own beliefs and opinions about some certain things until somebody comes along and challenges what you think. In Jesus's case, the people knew about him and his family growing up, and they had formed their opinions, right? They'd drawn their conclusions. They stopped wanting to know more. They weren't really curious about him at this point. And the fact that Jesus brings up a couple other examples of times that this has happened should probably get your attention. Because the truth is, all of us are susceptible to this. You can learn bits and pieces about Jesus. Maybe even you grew up in church or learned about him as a kid, or maybe not. But along the way, you can settle into this comfort zone, this idea that you know about Jesus, that you have your ideas or opinions, and you're hanging on to them because you're pretty sure you're right. I mean, after all, they're your ideas. Well, this passage in Luke teaches us that it's exactly that kind of thinking that you should be wary of, right? If you're not careful, you could encounter Jesus, and rather than believing he is who he says he is, you could be the one standing there with your arms crossed, thinking to yourself, I mean, this doesn't look like the Jesus I know, or I don't think I would do this, or that Jesus would be there, or say that, or be with those people, right? And without even realizing it, you might be missing out on truly getting to know Jesus, which honestly is absolutely necessary if you're going to have a relationship with him and follow him. Well, perhaps one of the saddest conversations I ever had with somebody revolved around this very issue. This was a person that I knew really well at the time. It was a lot of years ago now at this point, but when I talked to this man, he was in his late 50s, and I was asking him about Jesus and about Christianity. And he told me that he grew up in a town where it seemed like nearly everybody was Catholic. And he wasn't, but all of his friends were. And he went on to describe to me how he watched as they would party and drink and get rowdy on a Friday night and then go to church on Sunday and sit in some box and do their little confession, and bam, everything was clear, right? This was his perspective. Well, it seemed like it was something that really bothered him because at the time he continued to share stories with me about how he had asked his friends more about it. And it was from these conversations that most of his beliefs about God and Christianity were formed. He told me that it was back then, that's when he decided that the God of the Bible was probably just some kind of a joke, a way for people to feel better about doing bad things. So all those years later, when I was talking with him, I couldn't help but ask him if he was still sure that he had come to the right conclusions about God all those years ago. And he assured me that he was happy with what he believed. And honestly, that bothered me a lot that he said that. So I pressed a little harder. I was asking him, are you sure you want to hang on that tightly to the ideas that you came to about God and Christianity that were formed when you were back probably in high school? Do you want to hang on to those right now? And again, he said he was quite sure that he was right, and he didn't want to talk about it anymore. So here's the deal. The caribou here are real, and so is Jesus. If you're ever in Bonners Ferry, I hope that you'll take the time to stop by the museum to see them for yourself, along with all of the other amazing exhibits that they have assembled here. It really is a fabulous museum. And no matter where you are or what you've learned about Jesus so far in your life, I sincerely hope that you'll be open to getting to know him even better. If you're ready to start following Jesus, we would love to help you. All you have to do is reach out and let us know that you're ready to get going on the journey. You can email us and reach out at info@jointhejourneychurch.com, and we would love to help you get started. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you're enjoying this out-of-the-box approach to learning the Bible, please share this out with your friends and help spread the word. Excited to see you next week. We get out of the museum and on to chasing some fish. Don't know exactly where we're gonna be, but we'll find out. But the best part is we're gonna be fishing. Of all the caribou on display here at the Boundary County Museum, the good old white caribou still has the largest rack. He was scored by a Boone and Crockett official, and of all the animals on display, his rack scored the highest. He's not going to win any beauty pageants, but he has a big rack.